the agenda about matters. And we used to have a section about topics that the committee wanted to raise up in future meetings. Can we add that back? Because right now there's no real place for the committee to talk about things that they've heard from their constituents or things that we want to bring up. Can we add that into every agenda moving forward? Just say matters from the committee that aren't necessarily on the agenda, but for future agendas. Is that okay?
I think you got that, Ryan. Just like as the final 10 minutes of every meeting, just sort of have like matters from the committee.
Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe that there's nothing, but at least some opportunity to say, hey, I've heard this. Can we talk about this next meeting?
I agree. It used to be on the agenda years ago, so yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I can go ahead and share my screen. So I think the biggest thing that we're going to be talking about is we do want to spend some time talking about the website. We did make some updates to the website, and I am going to. Sorry, that's not. I realize. Sorry, guys. Dim the light so you guys can see a little bit. But the biggest thing that we wanted to do was just share some of the stakeholder discussion group feedback. And I realized that you all got the document with very short notice. So we're not really asking for any final feedback, but mostly just to report back what we heard and give Lee and Patrick a chance to also share some of their takeaways from that discussion. But as you all know, we conducted some stakeholder discussion groups to get an initial round of feedback about the draft goals and objectives that we had developed for the long-range transportation plan. So we held 3 different discussion group meetings. We held one with the business community, we held one with the public safety personnel, and then we held one with what we considered community partners. So these were kind of the both community activist groups and also some of the what we had kind of been calling equity priority groups, just because each of those lists were kind of short in and on their own. So we combined those into one group. We started off the meetings. We provided a little bit of background about the purpose of the Moving Toward 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan, described the planning process, and reviewed how their feedback would be used. So what we told them is that we would get some feedback from them with their initial responses to the draft goals and objectives, and we would use that to inform how we would be presenting information to the larger public when we got to those stages of the public engagement. We would use that to make changes and adjustments to the goals and objective language, add or remove goals or objectives, or recategorize the goals and objectives. And so when we got to the point where we started going through the goals and objectives themselves, I really turned it over to the consultants to let them facilitate that discussion in order to provide an opportunity for more, comfortable opportunities for feedback. I didn't want to kind of influence the discussion to the extent possible, so that the consultants facilitated that discussion. So these were the original draft goals that we developed: safety, environment, equity and accessibility, land use and economic development, and efficiency. So one of the things that we talked about as we were going through some of the public feedback that we received, and I apologize, Marty, I don't think that I added this one later. But we wanted to kind of better capture how these really important concepts of climate action and equity were being considered throughout the evaluation of the different goals and objectives. And so we had started by integrating some language around trying to reduce vehicle emissions and trying to fit these equity considerations into some of those goals and objectives. But really, what happened with the climate action and the equity objectives specifically is that they really were kind of integrated within these other goals and objectives. So the recommendation that we're making is to sort of take this climate action and equity lens approach, where we're saying that we are going to use this as a lens to evaluate the other goals and objectives. And we are going to say, is there a climate action or equity component to this that we need to capture and factor into the analysis? And so those were going to be kind of like all encompassing. We're not going to call those out specifically within the goals and objectives necessarily, but we're going to say that we want to filter the other goals and objectives language through these lenses first. We're kind of discussing metaphors. You can think of it as like a pair of glasses. Both microscopes and telescopes both have two sets of languages. If any of these metaphors resonate well with you, we can talk about updating this very basic image into something else. But the idea was that like that's going to help how we focus the conversations. So I want to emphasize that because otherwise it gets a little bit uncomfortable that you're going to see that the word equity is crossed out in a couple of places. So based on the feedback that we had, we did make some recommendations. Those were included in the memo. So I can go through those recommended changes, but I want you all to know that we'll come back and talk about these in more detail, knowing that you haven't had a lot of time to review those. So one of the things we talked about related to safety is the goal of reducing the frequency and severity of crashes, and really focusing on the fact that maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing if we don't reduce the frequency, because what's really most important to us related to safety is that we're reducing the harm that is caused to people in these accidents. So it's not necessarily about reducing the number of crashes related to safety. It's about reducing the impact of the harm to people through these crashes. So we're talking about reducing the frequency of serious injury and fatal crashes, which is a little bit more consistent with the federal performance targets and the goals that are evaluated there. And then there was a lot of discussion about the use of the term alternative modes of transportation. So we made some adjustments throughout to not use alternative modes of transportation. The concern is that made active transportation or transit or other multimodal transportation feel inferior to vehicles. So we changed the language where it seemed appropriate to improve the comfort and safety for users of the multimodal transportation system, which still has a little bit more emphasis on the non-single occupancy vehicle users, but does include all types of transportation modes as well. For the environment, this is where we kind of started deleting some of these objectives that were redundant because they were covered in other under other goals and objectives categories. So increase the use of alternative modes of transportation. We're already talking about doing that through our emphasis on the multimodal network throughout the goals and objectives. So it felt a little bit redundant to also include it here. And then when we're talking about reducing vehicle emissions, we're really not evaluating that explicitly as part of our process. We are trying to do things like improving opportunities for active transportation or better transit operations and things like that. So we do want to reduce vehicle emissions, but we're not doing that in and of itself through any of our specific objectives. And so that's where that like climate action lens comes into play.
Sorry, a quick comment on that. So reducing the average emissions on a vehicular basis is actually not an explicit goal of the long-range transportation plan, like such as encouraging the adoption of low emissions vehicles or zero emissions vehicles.
Yeah, that is not explicitly something that we're measuring. Yeah.
What's an example of reducing the negative environmental impacts of the transportation system that does not involve reduced vehicle emissions?
It could be about like actually where you're building the infrastructure. So for example, if you're going to put something in an area that has, some sort of environmental, species or some sort of like sensitive wetland area or something like that, it's also about really making sure that we're protecting those environmental features as well.
It seems like if that's the example, what about communities that live next to a highway? Those are species that are affected by the transportation system.
Yeah, and that actually is integrated into this environmental category. So that's also where that equity lens comes into play, because what we're doing is we're giving an additional priority for any of those communities that that would be more significantly impacted because there's some indication of, an equity consideration. Yeah,
it strikes me a little strange that we would not talk about encouraging modes of transportation that have fewer emissions.
We are, though. We're just doing that throughout.
Okay.
So like, for example, in the safety, we're improving the comfort and safety for users of the multimodal system. We want to make it more comfortable for people to use a range of options. When we get to the accessibility, for example, we want to increase mode choice for all users. So that's where it started feeling redundant.
Okay. So it's the lens.
Yeah.
Everything is looked at, or through which everything.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions?
Yeah, just real quick, so I appreciate that explanation. I certainly didn't pick that up reading the document.
Sure.
I mean, that's kind of, it wasn't put in the document. I suggest that you probably do that, because I saw equity struck, didn't realize the context with which you were striking it, so.
Yeah, it is.
Put that in this document.
It is mentioned in the document, is not necessarily emphasized in the document because it's like within the paragraph. It wasn't like necessarily, we don't have a good graphic, we don't have good language around that yet, so we'll be working on developing that. I think if we don't have the word equity throughout here, though, I agree that we need to like really make sure it's very clear that that's what we're doing.
I appreciate what you're emphasizing. I think listening to the steward, like,
Yeah.
He's like, well, what about this and what about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just, that's a pretty big change.
Yes.
Maybe putting that up towards the top of the document so somebody sort of like has it bifocals to look through it, would be helpful.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Would it be helpful to mention like the lens in some sort of way as a bullet point here? Like consider goals through climate lens or something, something like that, to make it more apparent and not,
But like my beautiful event. Yeah, we'll figure out how to like package that somehow. I mean, we do recognize that this is not necessarily ready to go for the public at large to sort of digest and understand that. So we probably need to develop some sort of graphic or chart or something that makes this very, very clear. Yeah. And it will probably be better than that Venn diagram, but that's what you got today.
You could change the colors of the different, the equity and environment, and then have a third color in the middle that blends the two.
Oh yeah.
Real way of
I know that's
yeah, something more.
that's some advanced PowerPoint graphic skills right there. We'll see we'll see what I can figure out with the help tool. All right. So again, the equity and accessibility, that was another place where we felt like we could kind of remove that emphasis on the equity because we want to emphasize it throughout. So improve access. And then there was a lot of feedback about this. People really didn't like the focus on jobs and opportunities. And I think you all had provided that as well. So we had these conversations about, do we like this as like two important community destinations? And really, it's just that we want people to be able to access whatever it is that they need or want to access throughout the region. So we just kind of took off, it doesn't matter what your access, we just want your access to be better by having more mode choice. And again, we took out that measure that was specifically related to improving that specifically for the underserved populations, because we wanted to make sure that, again, that same very similar language was popping up in multiple places. The land use and economic development. There was also some feedback in the discussion group about not really liking the emphasis on economic development, but I think it's important to include because it is also one of the goals of the federal performance system considerations, and it's also considered in SMART scale. So I don't think we want to delete economic development completely. But in Charlottesville, the considerations around economic development seems to be more focused around sort of to a similar extent as the land use coordination. It's not so much when we talk about the economic development, it feels like the focus seems to be a little bit more on getting people to their work and jobs and not necessarily on things like managing freight and getting freight access to important destinations. So I think it makes sense to leave these grouped together, at least from my perspective. We did want to better clarify, there was a lot of confusion around the land use and economic development and what this was really trying to communicate. So I think we're able to better capture that we want to align transportation system improvements with the local land use goals. So to make sure that where the localities have identified that they want their growth areas to be, that we are considering transportation solutions that will support those development decisions. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, I'm not unclear what that really means in terms of land use goals, because, the land use has a very specific meaning around here. It has to do with zoning and stuff. And so I don't know, I wouldn't know how to translate that into anything.
I think this is.
I see the goal there, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it relates at all to land use.
Really what we're trying to measure here is how to, this is just a tricky one to communicate all around. So if you all have thoughts or ideas, that's certainly helpful. What we're really trying to communicate here is that the localities have identified where they want to have these high density mixed use areas, where they want there to be growth and where they want people to be able to travel efficiently within those areas. They want to concentrate development in certain areas. So this is really about how do we prioritize or how do we evaluate transportation solutions that will help make those dense areas better connected, so that those things that are all within the growth area can be accessed easily from other places within those growth areas. We're trying to connect the stuff in the growth areas effectively and
When
efficiently.
you say growth, I'm on the AC 44.
Yeah.
So I'm more sensitive to this than any other.
Sure, yeah.
So, we already have identified where our density areas in the county is. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the city is doing, somebody else has to explain that. But, so, are you saying that you want to have connection between the various already identified density areas? Or are you suggesting the county, we should in land use have new density areas? That's really unclear.
Land use is a local decision. So we are not suggesting where the growth areas should be. We just want to make sure that we are considering transportation solutions that support the identified land use growth decisions that the localities make. That's really what that's trying to communicate.
Isn't that, well, that's really done in the sense, there is actually done in the sense of maybe equity and through the lens of equity, because when you're doing land use, you want to make sure people have access to transportation and also in terms of environmental impact. I wonder if you really need this. You have transportation, because it overlaps a little with transportation decisions.
You wonder if we, I think,
This land use and economic development.
I think we need to include it because it is also part of the evaluation of projects through Smart Scale, and because it also speaks to the climate action objectives.
Okay.
And, I agree. I think it's important to keep, because there is that connection between transportation supporting land use and land use driving transportation needs. But I do think it's interesting. That's a pretty broad statement there. It is kind of somewhat, when you started explaining about these activity centers, the density centers that you're talking about, the light bulb clicked for me. That's what you're saying there. I wonder if there's some way that you can be, little land use goals that come with real markets, that's broad. But
Yeah.
to connect it with those areas where transportation demand is going to be the highest, i.e. the more dense areas, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think, might be a way to wordsmith a couple qualifying terms in there.
Yeah, I think this was.
It made a lot more sense if you explained it.
Well, yeah, that's helpful. This has been like one that's been hard to communicate succinctly. So sounds like we're not quite there yet.
It almost feels like the access is present and this is this future outlook for where you'll need access.
Not
Based on land use decisions to build density in place, then you'll need access.
There could be a component to that. There could be a component. There's also components where there's maybe a school next to, there's a school that maybe there's a gap between a neighborhood and a school that isn't there. So it could be that there are already these existing opportunities to have connections that aren't already there. And we might want to prioritize those more.
And that gets captured in the access.
Yeah, so the difference between the accessibility and the land use is probably the accessibility is trying to help people get to, like, help people improve how many places they can get within a certain period of time. So it's focused on how people are traveling versus the land use, which is really talking about how are the destination points connected. So they are very similar. I agree. This has been very confusing to try to explain. Does that help or confuse things more?
Sandy, and
Yeah.
also Michael, is multimodal infrastructure, is that part of VDOT's language now in terms of this? And so in land use, for instance, now VDOT has a substantial say in what happens with development at an intersection or even along a stretch of road with deceleration lanes, sight lines, and so on. Does that also apply to multimodal? That's my question in terms of, you've got this nice development to put in something here and here, but there's nothing in between. And so that perhaps what this could lead to would be language where if the city or the county got a grant, they would go to the developer and say, you will not get your permit unless we see this type of infrastructure, just as you would with the highway. You would have it with multimodal. And as example, in the city's gone through a kind of a radical upzoning, which people, affordable housing advocates, I think can count as a victory, because part of that is developers are given incentives to do under market units. And so in this way, land use, again, a local matter, you're not telling people what to do with their land. But if they're going to do what they're allowed to do, part of the package is to connectivity and multimodal to the extent that they can.
Yeah, that's probably.
Is that already there? That's my question. I don't know.
To a certain extent, Michael, I don't know, or Chuck, I don't know if you heard the question, and feel free to jump in if you have better things to say about this than what I'm about to say. But I would say the opportunity for VDOT to require transportation improvements as part of a development is pretty limited to the direct impacts of what that site is going to do. So if there's like a gap half a mile away between a new development and a grocery store or shopping center or something like that, that's not necessarily within VDOT's purview or the locality's purview necessarily to be able to require that. Is that accurate?
But maybe that's an example of how transportation planning can affect land use, because, say, take an example of US 250 east of Charlottesville. If that road were improved, much more development could go there. That road is what, in its present condition, is what's limiting development. So if you wanted development there, then, it's a cart before the horse kind of thing. If you first improve the road, which is what the neighborhood associations are insisting on, then it'll support more development. Likewise, density in the city. If people are concerned about traffic impacts, if you first improve the traffic flow through intersection improvements or whatever, widening roads or providing more bike lanes or whatever it is, then that supports the development. So the two are kind of interconnected, and I know that's what you're trying to say here. It's just, like I say, I appreciate that it's complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, and again, if you think of the affordable housing people, they've been hollering about this for 20 years plus, and it's just here. So we're looking at 2050. That's what I'm saying, is that maybe that's a place for this to go. And again, Lee's amplification of that was okay, you've got this rural area, this rural road in a growth area. Here's how you're going to fix it if you want to fix it. whether the developer does it or the jurisdiction does it through smart scale or whatever.
Yeah, I think some of that is captured through other areas as well. So this isn't the only place, but yeah, I think really what we're trying to do is we're trying to make transportation efficient, safe, and effective in the designated areas so that people are able to, so those are desirable places for people to work and live and stay and, travel efficiently within those areas.
So if I were to try to reword, I would say to support planned land use, you create significant infrastructure to multimodal infrastructure, use that designation, to connect designated growth areas, mixed-use areas, schools, and other community resources. It's the connect portion that you've emphasized that's not there, and I think that's
Okay.
what I thought would be maybe clear.
Maybe helpful.
At least to me, at least. I don't know how everybody else.
Do you, what was it originally? Integrate transportation system. Oh, okay, it wasn't any clearer originally. Okay.
So what you're doing is providing.
Sonny, could I ask?
Providing multi-mode infrastructure to connect designated growth areas, mixed-use areas, and new community resources, rather than what you said there. The connection is what I thought you were emphasizing, and it's not apparent from that, other than the same. I mean, that's.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful to hear. What was it, Nicholas? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that maybe I'm moving far ahead of what you're here now, but I understand that this is a planning thing, in fact, a long-range planning. But I'm just wondering that particularly in highways, because now we are talking of an integrated system where you are talking of mass transit and highways. I'm just wondering whether, particularly in the highway system, there will be something that will be involved in the evaluation that will take into consideration capacity, throughput, and level of service. I have not heard anything about that, about this interaction.
Yeah, that's in the efficiency category, which is at the end of this. So we just haven't gotten there yet, but we will.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we'll make another attempt at this one. It sounds like, but I appreciate that, Marty. Maybe we'll focus. Maybe we can work the word connectivity within the identified growth areas, or something along those lines. Might be more clear. All right. Efficiency. Yay, we made it. So this is where we're really looking at trying to look at where there are some capacity limitations and figuring out what opportunities there might be to improve the capacity. One of the things we did was we moved this fill bicycle and pedestrian connectivity gaps. That was originally part of the, I believe it was, it was part of the land use and economic development. So we moved that to the efficiency. Just because that is a way for the bicycle and pedestrian networks to be efficient, is to be complete and not to have network gaps. I think there's an argument for it to go in either place, but this felt like it more comprehensively indicated that we were trying to take this full system multimodal approach across the board with all of these different criteria. So we're looking at opportunities to improve the roadway system reliability through operational improvements, and then also to increase system capacity at identified bottlenecks, and then maintaining the existing system in a state of good repair. This is not something that we're actually going to be measuring, just because it's not actually something that the MPA prioritizes. That's prioritized at the state level, but it still felt like it was important to talk about being good stewards of our existing transportation system. So those are kind of the reasons we made some of these adjustments from what we had originally. But I'd also be interested, Lee and Patrick, if you all had any feedback from sitting in on the discussion groups that you all wanted to maybe share or highlight.
Well, as I mentioned before, most of you got here to Sandy, was that I guess it's the consultants taking the notes, but I mean, they did an excellent job of summarizing the discussion. I mean, having sat through the one with the business community, I felt that they captured everything. I mean, I took my own notes and I compared it, and I didn't see that they missed anything. So we can rest assured that they're doing a good job of capturing what's said in those meetings.
Yeah, I would second that. the meeting I attended was the safety people, and the facilitator there almost got bowled over trying to get through all 5 or 6 or 7. Basically, what we talked about was safety, accessibility, and efficiency, and particularly Sandy's notes on those. I recognized every one of them. I'm sure some of them were repeated at some of the other meetings, but almost verbatim what came out of our meeting. And I will also say, just impressionistically, I was bowled over myself. Everybody at the safety meeting was at the operational level. And so it was a very frank and nuts and bolts kind of discussion in our group. And in retrospect, seemed to represent the starting point. In other words, if we're looking at 2050, this is clearly where we are right now. These people were talking about, and adding to the plan from their perspective. I thought it was terrific.
Great.
Could I ask you a question about, just to
Yeah.
clarify, when you're talking about efficiency, did you say there's no measurement
For the state of good repair.
for the what?
For the state of good repair.
Office.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So perhaps this is covered under accessibility because increased mood choice for all users is very broad. But it strikes me, because of the land use and economic development objective, that we mention growth areas and mixed use areas, but there's no real mention of alternatives for folks in rural areas. And my thought on that is like hopefully with changes in like zoning and what have you, these high growth areas will become more affordable. So the people who have been pushed out of the city can maybe come back. But say there's still going to be plenty of people living in rural areas, and right now, they only have the only way to get around is to use cars for the most part, or to get on a bike on a road with a car, and that presents particular safety challenges, right? So I'm just wondering if perhaps there should be something in there to talk about consideration of alternate routes that stray from roads that cars use. I don't know. Sorry, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so that will be covered a little bit in the accessibility, but also part of the reason that we're not focusing on the rural areas is because the MPO is defined as the urbanized area. So there are parts of it that are more rural than others in characteristics. Our MPO does go quite a ways outside of the urbanized areas, but that's why we're not really talking about how to get people from, Earlysville to Charlottesville, because that's, outside of the scope of what we're covering.
But there was a lot of discussion even at the business group about connectivity between, or multimodal between Crozet and Charlottesville. Because those are two areas that are in the MPO, and being able to bike safely from Crozet to Charlottesville, definitely a goal shared by a lot of those people.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
I was going to ask about this safety, just to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So remind me, Andrew, through getting people's opinions. I get a lot of pushback on bicycles. They felt they were somewhat dangerous. I'm going to get killed here. But they were safety hazards, and particularly because there aren't very good paths for them on the roads.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people experience bikers not following traffic rules. And I wonder how that fits into what we're doing. And I was gonna say, one person brought up, I think in Denmark, the way they have it set up, they have the bike lane, car parking, and then the major transportation lanes. So, but I wonder, how is the safety and process?
Yeah, well, I don't know specifically, Marty, that we're going to get into that level of detail in this plan specifically, but we are also doing the Safe Streets and Roads for All plan, which is going to look at multimodal system considerations. And I think as we, what we're really trying to do with the long range transportation plan is take a high level look at what our priorities need to be, and then we'll start working to develop solutions. So I think it's probably going to be, as we start working through what is the right solution to some of these system deficiencies that we've identified as really high priorities, is when we start having those discussions.
But as we go through this, the next 5 years, not much is going to happen, But as we talk about multimodal, you're talking about bikes in there. And I'm still sort of concerned how we're just going to broad brush that as it goes along, or how's that lens going to work?
Well, I think the way it works is we're going to say we need to improve that. There's a multimodal system need here. We need to figure out how we can get bikes safely from, along this corridor between this point and this point. And then we're going to look and say, is that by creating a shared use path? Is that by creating a bike lane? We're going to start having conversations about what the potential solutions might be. And then we can talk about, what is going to be the best solution that we can implement for those. I don't know, do you want to say anything, Michael, from VDOT's perspective on how y'all are kind of approaching this? There's a new trails program at the state, so I think they're looking beyond just, roadway solutions for bike paths, but I don't know.
So is that part of this, looking for solutions other than roadways for bike, as we talk about multimodal?
It could be.
Are you defining multimodal eventually in this document somewhere along the line?
I don't know that I've considered whether or not there would be a definition in here, but we can if it feels like we need to.
It just means all roads.
Yeah.
I understand that, Diane. It means trains, airplanes,
Yes.
light airplanes.
We're really talking about surface transportation.
Including buses.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very-
Maybe they will be added someday. I don't know. Do you want to add anything about the trail system or the state's approach to these non-roadway?
It's a mode of, it's a way to go from point A to point B. We can do it either on the road network or we can do it on a trail network. The trails don't necessarily have to follow the roadways. So there's a lot of flexibility when you get to some of these other modes about where they go. Traditionally, we run them along the roadways because that's how we've done it. But there's a lot of trail systems out there that are off-road that may be more beneficial and provide the same use for bicyclists and pedestrians. And it would possibly be safer for them because they're not having to mix with the vehicle traffic that's traveling up and down the road. So those are some of the things that we'd have to evaluate. The big thing about this is, as part of the long range plan, we're going to identify where the critical needs are, and then how we solve those needs is the next step. So let's get through the process and identify where the issues are, and then we can work on studying what the best solution is to address that need. Does that make sense?
I can see though, that people look at the lens of environmental impact and say we need to have bikes. And push it beyond, maybe what's reasonable in terms of safety or other issues, or in terms of it's not so clear to me that just saying that somehow I don't have a good sense of the process, because we're going to have advocacy groups. We probably have them here in the room. So I just don't see it. I don't see how you're going to sort through all of that
in the process?
It's because we don't have to sort through all of it in this one process. This is one process that helps set us up for the next series of processes.
Yeah, like Sandy said, this is identifying where the needs are and prioritizing those needs. Then after we've got that list of needs, then we would basically start working on how we're going to solve those needs or what solutions we're going to use to address those needs. And that's more getting at what you're talking about. But that's something that we would do as a next step after the long range plan is developed.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other?
Yeah, I think
Sorry, Stuart.
two other advantages to trail development. And I'm speaking in the city now because that's where I live. And almost all of the trails in the city go along waterways. So from an end user standpoint, you have the advantage of a couple million years of evolution taking care of all the hills. They're primarily flat. And then from a cost basis, I know there is acquisition of right-of-way issues right now, both in the city and the county. But bike lanes in the traffic lane have a VDOT spec to me in terms of depth of road bed, depth of pavement, and so on. You could build a very good bike lane along a creek somewhere, or a multimodal that would have culverts in all the right places and have proper grading and everything else. Be a nice piece of structure that would have not much more than a suburban driveway spec, and that's got to be cheaper. And again, a little more user friendly. And the huge advantage is that both cyclists and pedestrians don't have to interface with traffic at all. So
I heard that from cyclists too. Yeah. Don't put my bike lanes on the busiest roads. Yeah. Put them on, there.
So yeah, that's worth making sure, even if it's in the back of your mind and not in the text, to bring that along as you speak with, the jurisdictions here as well as VDOT.
Sure. Yeah.
The next slide, I think it is.
Keep going.
One more. Efficiency. One more. One more.
How'd y'all know?
Improve roadway system reliability. Is it reliability? Is it efficiency? Are our roads unreliable, or are we just using those kind of as synonyms?
Did we talk about this, Curtis? Do you remember?
Sandy, I remember at our meeting came up, and reliability in the way you were using it, or are using it, is that someone who goes into a roadway can rely on the results. Predictability.
That's maybe a better term.
I'm not gonna be sitting there for 3.5 hours.
Yeah. It's more like, the commute usually takes you an hour a day, even if it's congested. There's a lot of people, on peak hours, you can be there half an hour, but it's be an hour every day.
Yeah.
Reliability means it's usually an hour. It can be sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes being 30 minutes, sometimes being 2 hours.
Yeah, this was one. I don't remember if this was one that we talked about specifically. If we wanted to use reliability, there are like technical terms for some of these, and then there are layman's terms for some of these. So if predictability makes more sense, we could also use predictability.
I was going to say, like, reliability has a statistical definition. It's basically variance, right? Whereas the efficiency is the mean, is the average. Yeah. That's the federal highway definition.
Yeah. Yeah. So it could also be efficiency. That would probably also make sense. I think reliability is based on system efficiency and also maybe safety. Those might be the two.
That makes sense.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, any other feedback or thoughts? High level or in the weeds, either way. Okay. Cool. Well, I think, I don't know, Ryan, I can stop sharing my screen if you want to. Do you have the website ready to pull up, or do you want me to do that?
Yes, because I'm not sure where this screen.
We just wanted to let you know that we're still working on the website. We have a couple more things to do, but we've incorporated a lot of your feedback into it. I don't know if any of you all had a chance to look at it before tonight. Do you want me to pull it up?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
This one.
Let's see. So, where am I? There we go. All right, so we go down to our fancy little logo here and get a visit plan page. So we adjusted some of the language a little bit. We added some pictures. We broke up the text. The content is still largely the same, but we did add this line about how can we reduce the climate change impacts of the transportation system. So made sure that we are capturing that. Let's see, added some little logos, broke this up a little bit, tried to like emphasize those main areas. So we'll have to obviously update this language once we finalize the goals and objectives, but we'll do that. It looks a little bit better on a not pink screen, but hopefully you guys can.
These aren't the colors we're using?
No, these are not the official colors, unfortunately. So these, like, why is it important? We tried to like limit the text so you can hit these little buttons to expand it, and it will tell you more and link to some of the projects and other information. But that way, when you go to the page, you can kind of just scan through it if you don't want to engage that in that much detail. And then we added some links to some other documents. We still need to work on the project timeline, and we're having another meeting with our consultant to get this updated, or our web manager to get this updated. But just wanted to let you all know that we're getting pretty close to wanting to post some of these process documents up for the public. And as we get ready for the phase of like the broad public engagement, we'll start posting information up here. So we're pretty close to like start sending people information to direct them to this webpage. But any feedback or thoughts or comments? Nope. We're getting there. Okay. Cool. Do you want me to keep going, Lee?
Yeah, we'll on to the next thing.
I don't remember what's next, so.
Federal grants.
Federal grants, okay.
So safe streets.
Safe streets.
Yeah, all right, so let me stop sharing because that's not the right thing. All right. So the first one I wanted to let you know about is that we, this is a very busy page, so I apologize for that. But as you all know, we had applied for the Ravenna River Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge in round 5 of Smart Scale, and it was not awarded. So for those of you that are not familiar with this project, we've been putting a lot of effort into creating a connection across the Ravenna River between the Woolen Mills portion. They're both in Albemarle County, but the Woolen Mills area right here, and then the Pantops area right here behind. This is what used to be the State Farm building, connecting to the lower portion of Pantops. So this has been an identified need. The MPO has done a lot of work to sort of identify the general idea, go through and work with the VDOT to do a feasibility study, identify a preferred alignment, and then submit the application. What happened when we submitted the application, as you all may recall, is that it's in a sensitive area. It's crossing a river. They're going to have to do some borings into the into mid-river sediment island. There were a lot of unknowns about exactly what the ground was going to look like in order to determine what kind of engineering structures were going to have to be placed and what it was going to take to put the piers in, those kinds of things. So there was a really high contingency factor. And then what happened is that we started with a base cost of $18 million for the project. There's a 60% contingency that was added to the construction phase of the project. And then there's an additional inflation escalation that's added on top of the base cost plus the contingency. And so what happened is that this project escalated to $42 million when we submitted the grant application. And so even though the smart scale scoring process acknowledged that there were really high benefits to this project, the final cost that was associated was too high for this to be competitive. So what we did was the project was pretty much already scoped out. So what we did was we applied for a grant through the RAISE program, which stands for Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, to complete the preliminary engineering phase, which would answer a lot of those unknowns and help us hopefully have a more accurate estimate for what the actual construction cost of the project would be. So the RAISE discretionary grant program, it was formerly, I don't remember what any of these acronyms stand for, but BUILD or TIGER, you might have heard of these grant programs, but they're large federal grant programs. They're highly competitive. They cover all modes of transportation. And they include both funding for both planning and implementation. So there was a little bit of additional funding that was added to these programs through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So in FY23, there was $115 million that was designated for planning grants, and out of a total of $775 million. Because we are just doing the preliminary engineering, even though it's considered an engineering phase, according to the RAISE notice of funding opportunity, anything that goes up to the right-of-way acquisition phase is considered planning. So we applied for a planning grant to complete the pre-construction activities. This is the merit criteria that the RAISE grant uses to evaluate projects. So there are 8 merit criteria: safety, environmental, sustainability, quality of life, mobility and community connectivity, economic competitiveness and opportunity, state of good repair, partnership and collaboration, and innovation. And basically we had to create an application and to explain this is why our project aligns well with these criteria. Projects are scored on each of the merit criteria. They'll be given a high, medium, low, or non-responsive score. And then based on how well they score in each of those 8 categories, they'll be assigned an overall rating. So the highly recommended category gives us the best chance of having our project considered for funding. We needed high scores in 6 criteria and no non-responsive scores. I believe that this project has the opportunity to score well in at least 6 of these criteria, probably just 6. They're probably not more than that. But so this does align very well with the RAISE grant criteria, and we're hopeful that it will be a competitive application. There's another analysis. So the best projects get forwarded to be considered, in additional rounds of evaluation, and then. But the challenge is that even though the project or the application may be strong, it's a discretionary grant program, and they're trying to fund a diversity of applications. So they're looking at different modes, they're looking at different states, they're looking at a good mix of urban versus rural. So even if it's a good application, we may not get funded because it's not the right type of application. So what we included in the project scope was to complete the preliminary engineering. You can see a list. Those are some of the tasks that will be completed. TJPDC staff will be the project sponsor and fiscal agent. And then we were really excited to be able to collaborate with VDOT, who agreed to administer the technical aspects of the project. So, Michael and I worked really hard on the application, and VDOT made sure that we provided a lot of the information and had all of that accurate. So what ends up happening is that if we are successful, VDOT will take the lead on, doing all the things that VDOT does in order to prepare a project that would potentially go to the right-of-way and construction phases. So then we know that, if we are successful in receiving this funding, we'll get the information we need, and this will all comply with VDOT's requirements to develop the project, and it will be ready to continue to move through their pipeline. The total funding that we ended up requesting is just a little over $3 million, and we'll find out at the end of June. like I said, even the program is very highly competitive. If we are not successful this round, that what they told us in one of the webinars is that sometimes it takes several rounds for good applications to be funded, and they do offer debriefs for all applications. So we could, if we're not successful, we could have a debrief and determine whether or not we would like to resubmit for future rounds. Any questions on the RAISE grant? No. And I would sincerely like to thank VDOT and especially for Michael for all the coordination. It was a lot to pull together in a very short time period.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So when this is all said and done, the $3 billion will get us basically construction drawings to build the bridge.
Well, it will, the construction drawings, but also the evaluation of like all the environmental mitigation, the geotechnical, and it will also.
But it will include.
Yeah.
You're ready to go.
Yes.
It would get you to the right-of-way phase.
Yeah.
Then you'd have to obtain the right-of-way. There's usually some engineering that happens after the right-of-way phase, the final documentation. But it would be generally defining what the project's going to be and its impacts and generally speaking, its cost.
And then are we going through smart scale with less contingency? Is that
That's the idea, yeah.
Yeah, that's one potential option. It could be smart scale. It could be we go back to for a RAISE grant for implementation too. That will really give us information we need to determine what a viable path forward might be. I prefer it to be a smart scale application, but we'll
In smart
see.
scale, sometimes the county or the city have added some money to the application. Would it have helped if we said that we would provide some of the funding part of it? It's only $3 million, I know.
Well,
Not at that stage, because you were talking about 42 million.
No, but for this stage, if we're requesting $3 million for this next stage, and we said we'll contribute $500,000.
Well, this is for a RAISE grant. So for a RAISE grant, that actually does not factor in. Yeah, that actually. Yeah, but when we get to smart scale, once we know. Yeah.
What's the timeline of smart scale? What is the next? Like, how does this finding this out tie into all of this? So we'll see. First, we have to see if we get funded, and then there's going to be some lead time before the funding is made available. And I think the timeline we developed, Michael, was at 3 years for VDOT to complete the PE.
Probably be ready for not the next round 6, but probably round 7.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Stuart.
Speaking of discretionary grants.
Yes.
Yesterday, I think the Fed announced $2.5 billion in discretionary grants for communities for alternative fuel charging. So like for communities to get money to put chargers, for example. Any sense if Charlottesville Albemarle is going to apply for any of those grants?
I doubt that would be the MPO because unless I am wrong, I think that is for like actual installation of the charging infrastructure. Is that your understanding?
I think that's part of it, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if the city or the county, and I haven't seen anything recently, but the other grants I was looking at was more about the implementation, which wouldn't make as much sense for the MPO to move into that space. Yeah. I don't know. But if you have that email and you want to forward it to me, I'll take a look. Yeah. Any other questions about the RAISE grant? All right. I think we sent out the press release to you all about the Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary grant program, but this is one that you all will also be hearing a lot about because we just found out that we were awarded just $857,000, which includes a 20% match by the localities for just under 1.1 million to develop multi-jurisdictional comprehensive safety action plans for our region. So this is a grant that was established by the bipartisan infrastructure law as well that allocated between $5 and $6 billion over the next 5 years, so $1 billion per year for 5 years, specifically focusing on reversing the trend that we're seeing right now of the increase in roadway deaths and serious injuries. There were two tracks for the grant programs, planning and implementation. But in order to apply or be eligible for implementation grants, you first had to have a qualifying comprehensive safety action plan in place. None of the localities in our region had a comprehensive safety action plan, so we were able to work with all 6 of the jurisdictions throughout the region, and all of them agreed to participate and provide the match. The comprehensive safety action plan components include these 8 different factors that are required to be considered. So there has to be a commitment from your leadership to identify and set some of these performance metrics around safety. So some of these, you might hear of these zero vision plans where localities are saying basically any serious injury or roadway death rate that's above 0 is something that is not acceptable, and we want to do everything we can until we reach 0, or else seriously reduce what the serious injury and crash rates are from what they are currently. There's going to be the development of an oversight group. We're going to be working with VDOT and some of the funding programs that they have to also do a comprehensive safety data analysis that will be incorporated into the development of the safety action plan. It has to include substantive stakeholder engagement, which also informs this next requirement, which is that the process has to be inclusive and representative. It will include not just looking at infrastructure, but also looking at how enforcement and potentially policies and processes that are implemented impact safety outcomes, as well as looking at public education and information sharing efforts. And then from this, each locality will identify their priorities for projects and strategies that they are willing to support in order to reduce crash outcomes. And then we also have a requirement to conduct ongoing monitoring and reporting to reflect back on how successful the implementation of the safety action plan strategies are.
So this is a full scope. So when you say reporting successful, that means you're going to get the grants. Is that right? I mean, some of those steps mean you have to get the grants. You can't say how successful it is.
Yes.
You're monitoring and reporting until you get the grants.
Sure. Some of them might be grants for infrastructure, but some of them might also be looking at, what are some of the public information safety? What are some changes and how we enforce some of the safety laws? It's really trying to take a look at what are all the different ways that all of these people who are focused on the safety on roadways can come together.
And who do you find as localities? I know this is still, who do you find as localities?
Well, our agreements are with jurisdictions. So Charlottesville, Albemarle, Nelson, Fluvanna, Louisa, and Greene County.
So all of those their transportation departments are going to contribute people, or how is that going to work? Are you representing them, providing them feedback, or what?
We will have to develop stakeholder groups. We'll probably have a tier. We'll probably have a big stakeholder group, and then we'll probably have individual stakeholders that we work with at each of the localities as well.
When is that going forward?
Well, we're having the kickoff meetings with the USDOT already. So I think they're trying to be as expeditious and flexible at making that funding available. But probably within the next month or 2 is when the funding will be available. So this just shows some of the benefits. It's going to give us better information about crash locations and what the contributing factors are. It's multimodal in nature, so we're looking at safety for all types of users. It will help us do some relationship building among stakeholders. In addition to the planning people that are normally involved in these discussions, we'll also be engaging with the health department, with the public safety personnel, maybe with some of the school systems. We'll need to work with our localities to really figure out who the stakeholders are that need to be part of the discussion. But all of these entities are working on safety from a different perspective, and trying to bring all of them together, I think, is a really good opportunity for this. And then what will also help us create a pipeline of projects that we can continue to find opportunities to implement, either through Smart Scale or some of the other state programs, or even the federal programs as long as those are available. It was a multi-jurisdictional application, so I think I already covered that. So one of the other benefits is that it will also support information sharing between the localities, not just among the different stakeholders at the localities. And then the TJPDC already has these different committees that are set up through the MPO and through the Rural Transportation Program that can support the ongoing monitoring and reporting functions. So the total project funding was just under $1.1 million. Nearly half of that is scoped to go towards stakeholder and public engagement. And like I said, we're working with VDOT on the data collection and the crash analysis. So any other questions on this project?
Consultant to help out.
Yeah, we will. Got to come up with a catchy name.
Safety associates.
Moving towards the comprehensive safety action.
We're on to additional matters from the public, which I presume is still not a member of the public on line. So, to Stuart's point, anyone from board here have any comments? Anything you want to add?
I already raised mine about the discretionary grant, so I'll see what I can find that's relevant to send to you.
Sure.
All right, well, I guess,
Motions.
yeah, I guess we'll adjourn.
Oh, we forgot to introduce you to Curtis in the midst of things. Curtis is our new transportation planner that started. How long ago, Curtis?
Speech.
About a month ago.
I was wondering.
Sorry, we were a little preoccupied at the beginning with trying to get the technology going. Thanks.
Welcome, Curtis.
Welcome to Shark Tank.
Thank you all for sitting in the dark with us tonight.
Did you get a chance to park?
I did. I thought of you as I was grabbing them.